Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you to the Navionics Bass Pro webinar tonight, highlighting Skylar Hamilton from Dandridge, Tennessee, 21-year-old. He's fifth year finishing the Bassmasters Opens. He qualified for the 2017 Bassmasters Classic by winning the Central Open on the Arkansas River in June. Way cool. My name is not Paul Mickley, which it says on the screen. My name is John Knoll. I'm the Eastern Regional Sales Manager. I've worked with Skylar for the last couple years, and he is on our field staff. Does a great job for us. And when I heard that he won this, I was ecstatic. My boss was also, so we got to get him on here. And I want to thank Bass Pro for helping to promote this also. Guys, just to let you know, we will be recording this. It is available later to see it. If you missed something, want to come back and hear what Skylar has to say. We will also, at the very end, be taking any questions. So if you see something that you want to ask a question, just type it in. I'll be reading them to Skylar at the very end, and then he'll answer them. If for some reason we get to we're running out of time, well, we will make sure that they all do get answered by an email. For when you register, that all gets put into a little log. We don't bother you as far as that goes, but we want to make sure that all your questions do get answered. And if there's anything we can ever help you out with at Navionics, please don't hesitate. Go to navionics.com. We have a great help area. They have live chat, which a lot of people like that because you get instant answers. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Skylar. This is your show, brother. I'm just going to sit back, watch, and relax, and try to learn something because I can always pick something up from you guys that are on the water all the time, where I'm always working, they're always fishing. That's the way that goes. So, Skylar, thanks again. I do appreciate you coming on board tonight and taking time with us. It's all yours, brother. I'm going to mute out myself so you don't have to hear the background anything, as well as I'm going to turn my video off, but I will come back. I'm not going anywhere, so if something happens, just let me know, brother. Thanks, man. All the help.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, I've really enjoyed working with John for 2 years now, and I appreciate him setting this up. And he was ecstatic. My mom and dad and girlfriend were pretty ecstatic when I won that too. So next time I'm leading one, we need to all get together and y'all can just throw stuff up there together and just have a big time. But thanks again for having me, and I'm going to try to, teach you some tips and stuff. The Arkansas River tournament, that was the first time I'd ever been there, and Bass has had a few tournaments there, but I've never fished on that. I've fished Fort Gibson Lake, which is actually right above that. One of the tailwaters leads into the Arkansas River. So I was familiar with Oklahoma, but I had never fished that area. And I've heard it was a pretty good fishery, and I can see why bass keeps going back. But we'll get this started. And I've got a few slides. I'm going to talk about a few things, and maybe you can learn something. Well, let me go back. Okay, here was the Arkansas River, and I'm not going to bore you to death with all this stuff, but I just wanted to show you, the area that we were fishing in, and it was a huge. This maybe is a quarter of the water we could fish. And, the takeoff was pretty close. It was right here below this bridge. And there was a lock up here in this arm, and then there was a lock down here in Gore. And you could basically fish. You could go anywhere you wanted to. You could go to 10 Killer, the tailwaters at 10 Killer. You could go anywhere. And, I mean, it was a huge body of water. It's one of the biggest bodies of water I've ever fished besides, like, St. Clair or the Great Lakes. But just that much river water to fish and to figure out that quick was pretty hard to do. And, I ended up taking my aluminum boat, which kind of limited to me where I could, the distance I could run. And a lot of the guys were locking through down past Gore. And, but basically I started my practice. And what's pretty neat is, the water was flooding, and I figured, back here at the house, whenever you have a lot of flooding water, flooding rivers, it takes a few days, and the rivers will get cleaned back out. But there's so many, run-ins and so many rivers that come in that it just didn't clear up. It took forever, and it never did clean up. It never went down. It went down a few feet, but it never really got stable, even when we left. So that kind of made it easier on me knowing where those fish are going to be at, because when you've got that much water flowing through the river, you have so much more current than you usually have, and there's only a few places those fish can be. So when I'm looking at a map like this, I learned the river was flooding. I start looking at places those fish can get out of the current. And you see, where our takeoff was from up here, I started looking at the first few creeks I could find that, you could get out of the main river. And I ended up catching some decent fish out of these creeks and all these little arms and stuff. But the water fluctuation, I mean, it was killing me. I could go up this is a creek in particular. I was past this bridge up in this creek, and I could catch. One day I went up there and caught 15 pounds of fish, and the next day I went up there and I caught 2 or 3. I mean, it was just, and I spent most of my practice in this creek. And by the last day of practice before the tournament, I went up there and caught 2. And so I was kind of hurting. And one other place that I'd checked was below the lock, which in an aluminum boat that only goes 30 miles an hour, was a pretty good distance from here all the way down past here. And what it was is 10 Killer Lake right here is a real popular lake, but there's the tailwaters that come out of the dam feed into the Arkansas River. And once you go through the lock and go up this, it has a big smallmouth. It's really clear and clean and cold. There's actually trout. I caught a lot of trout in that river. So, I was pretty excited about that. I spent half a day of practice in there and only caught 1 4-pounder. And so that was where I was going to go, just based on what I knew. And when I went up there, I ended up not staying. It was too far for me to go, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But I just wanted to show we had so much water, and this doesn't cover a quarter of it. There was guys going down 2 or 3 locks from this one and having an hour and a half, 2 hours of fishing time. And, to me, that's not the way I like to do things. I hate locking through because, especially here, it's not like in Florida where you have a little bitty lock. You go through it, and you can always get back through. These here, the barges take priority. So if you're in line to get in the lock and the barge comes up through there, you're out of luck because the barge is going to go through first, and you can get trapped down there and not get the way you're fishing. But we'll go to the next slide. This was the winning location. Yeah, this was the entrance to my little backwater area. And I told you about trying to find places that those fish could get out of the current. And that river had been flooding so high, and I've got some pictures later on. But that river was so high that I knew those fish were going to be in places that they'd never been before or that people couldn't get to. And the thing was, that water, it fell like 5 feet from when we got there, and it was still flooding. So I realized those fish aren't going to be, I kind of had an advantage then. Well, I didn't. The locals didn't have an advantage. I had it was a level playing field, and I'd fished a lot of flooding rivers back here at the house, and the fish are really easy to find as long as you get them to bite and the water's not too muddy. But this was the entrance to my little backwater area. As you can see, there's not much. There was actually a silt bar out here that you can tell, and there was a log jam, and this was the entrance I took in. And what it was is this little silt bar, the first day that I went down there in the tournament, it was really shallow. And I'll tell you the funny story, what ended up happening was as I was going to the lock to go to 10 Killer, there was all kinds of this garbage and stuff floating, all this big trash. And there's a picture of my boat. It's a tunnel prop aluminum boat. So basically the water tunnels up through the bottom of the boat and shoots into the prop. And when you have trash that gets in it, you can't go anywhere. It if you pick up a piece of grass, you can tell. So I hit trash 2 or 3 times, went down there to the lock, turned around, I said, I'm not doing this. I waste so much time. And it was already 8 o'clock. We blasted off at 6. So I'd wasted a pretty good time just trying to get to somewhere I didn't even know there was fish. And I got near this oxbow, and I got up through there, and I said, that looks pretty good. I had no idea that you couldn't get a bass boat in here. I looked back through there and saw that there wasn't anybody in there. And my co-angler lived on the river but had only fished it a couple times. And I said, hey, have you ever heard anything about this oxbow? He said, yeah, my buddy Doug hunts in there all the time. He said, I don't think you can get a bass boat in there. I don't think you can get this boat in there. And I said, well, man, that's why I brought this boat. We're going to get somewhere somebody else can't. And he was right. It was hard. It was really hard to get in there. And, there was a few bass boats that had come in the back side of it right here. And that came in the back side, and they were fishing about right in here. But they were starting to get stuck because there was a huge bar and all kinds of stumps and logs that kind of got tangled up. But, I just kind of pushed my way through there. And this all opened back up, and it was just a huge lake that I had to myself. There was one other aluminum boat that was in there. and it was just full of reeds. It was full of everything. And what was neat about that is I don't know if those fish lived back there all the time because it was still super shallow. I mean, it was less than 2 foot deep, and for the most part, and the stuff I was fishing was a foot, if at the deepest a foot. And what was cool is that even when the water's down, there's still water in there. So I don't know if those fish just live in there or if that was the water had been so high for so long that they just decided, hey, this is somewhere we haven't been, or there was a new food source, or this opportunity. I mean, they're going to explore a little bit. So, there wasn't that many fish in there, which makes me think that they were probably native fish. But there's always a chance that they could have just came in because of the flood waters. But I think those fish just live back there. Okay, I told you about my aluminum boat. Here's a picture of it. And I get a lot of questions about this boat. So be sure to take a look. And if you have any questions, just type them in. But, this is a Tracker Grizzly, an 1860 Grizzly. I think it's a 2010 that me and my dad had bought for catfishing. And as you can see, it's not a catfishing boat anymore. My dad was kind of upset because he said he can't even drive it now because it's so jacked up in there. But we've added a lot of things to it. We've got that was the original top of the boat there, and we added that extension up, the transom extension, and then we braced all that up and stuff. I didn't do it. My buddy Mike Watson, who's a really good welder, did all that. And we had the Atlas hydraulic plate, just to get your engine up even higher. But this is all the way extended, and that's the way I run it probably 80% of the time, because you're not going to hit anything. From the side, you can kind of tell, but it's got about 3 inches of clearance before any of this will touch. So the bottom of the boat's going to touch before anything else does. And that's the tunnel. It's about a 10-inch tunnel cut into the hull of the boat, and it runs up about halfway into the bottom of the boat. So it shoots water out as you're going down the river and throws it up into the prop. So I don't know how it works. You need to get some kind of physicist on here or something, but it works somehow. You lose a lot of speed, but all I know is you can go really shallow with it, and that was the only way I could get into that spot. Now, there was one other aluminum boat that got in there, and he ended up finishing 6th, I think. But he didn't have a tunnel. He just had a regular aluminum boat, which was probably the better setup for the area we were fishing. I took this boat planning on running up behind the dams, 10-Killer Dam and the Fort Gibson Dam, which are really rocky rivers like we have here in Tennessee. So this boat's not made, really for stumps and for grass and all that. It's made for rocks. It's made to go over rocks. It's just made to go over real shallow water. And it turns out that it can go in the backwaters. You just lose so much speed. And I would have been okay with just a regular aluminum boat. But the final day, I caught 2 fish that the other guy couldn't get to because it was about 3 inches deep, and it was just silt. And what was neat about this boat is I could trim this all up, and I could idle across 3 inches of water and still have water pressure and just blow mud everywhere and get across that bar. I didn't want to get a run and go like them Gator guys on TV and jump nothing because I had my fish and my co-angler and stuff, and bass probably wouldn't like that too well. But you can idle so much shallower with this setup, but you can run extremely shallow. I've ran it 4.5, 5 inches of water and never even touched. And I've touched stuff in 4 inches of water that didn't hit the prop or anything, because you're going to tear the bottom of this boat out before you hit your prop and your skeg. It took a lot of work I've tore up a lot of props. I've got a good prop guy down here in Tennessee that know if your prop guy knows you by your first name, then it's probably not a good thing, because I've got too many props. But that was the boat that I took. I took it for the wrong reasons, it turned out. But if it hadn't have been for that tunnel, and if it hadn't have been for me being able to access that backwater and fish it so easily, and not realizing how hard it really was to get in there and fish, I definitely wouldn't have won it. This boat led me to that spot with getting all the stuff stuck in the tunnel. It let me fish those reeds. It let me flip and get real close to the fish without scaring them, because in a foot of water, a big boat's going to make a big presence, and those fish know what's there. I mean, they're not stupid. Even if the water's dirty, they can feel that presence of a boat. that's why that aluminum boat gave me an edge. And even if I could take a bass boat in there, by the final day, I had a trail marked out so well that I think I could have ran a bass boat in there. But I don't think I could have fished it very effectively. I think I'd have been picking my trolling motor up constantly or push pulling around through there. I just don't think it would have worked. And the stumps were so bad. If you hit one stump with a bass boat the wrong way, you're done. With this boat, you hit 20 stumps a day. You might tear a little hole in your boat, but you're not going to be dead in the water. You're going to be okay. I always do that. I double tap for some reason. Let me go back. Okay, this was actually inside the oxbow where I fished. And this was James Overstreet. Actually, he followed me in the final day because my trail was so well marked. And he's a photographer for bass. And he said, yo, can I make it in there? So if you follow me, I ain't going to make, any promises, but you might hit a few stumps, but you can get in there. And this was taken in the oxbow. And what was neat is my trolling motor is dragging right there. And I don't know how many fish I caught around that beaver dam during that tournament, but I caught a bunch. And the day that he was in there, I didn't catch a single one. But if he had got any closer to my boat, he would have been stuck. But I could fish all that, and those reeds went way back through there. I mean, you can see the trees in the background. And those fish, they were, most of them were about 2 or 3 foot back inside the reeds. And what was neat is the first day that I went in there during the tournament at 8 o'clock, I saw all these reeds on the left side, and it was so shallow that I didn't think there was any way I could get to it. And there was the right side of the oxbow that was deeper, that had rocks and overhanging trees and all that. So naturally, I went to the right side, and I spent probably a good hour and a half fishing that side and never got a bite. But the thing that was neat is I looked on the trees, and if all you gotta do is pay attention. And most of the time, if you just take little clues and put them all together, you're going to find out what the fish are doing. But there was this gigantic mayfly hatch. I mean, I've never seen a mayfly hatch this big in my entire life. Every tree was coated. I mean, they were black. And a few of them would fall in the water, and you'd see bluegill come up and eat them every now and then. So in my head, I naturally, you start thinking, well, mayflies are falling in the water. These bluegills are eating them. There has to be bass in here. Now, this is a summertime tournament, too. You're not expecting to catch fish that shallow that time of year on a river that's really hot, where all they have to do is swim out in the main river, and they can be in 10 foot of water and have plenty to eat. Well, in this situation, whether it was the muddy water or the high water or the current, this backwater was full of them. I mean, big ones. And I think a lot of it was there wasn't that much pressure. But when you go into somewhere and you see what the fish are eating, there's going to be fish there. I mean, they might not bite as good as you like them to, but if you see mayflies falling in the water, if you see bluegills eating the mayflies, I saw bluegill beds, I saw shad spawning, I saw blackbirds falling in the water, crappie. I seen probably the biggest crappie in my entire life. Something was trying to eat it, and I was trying to catch the crappie. I wasn't concerned about what was eating the crappie, but I wanted to catch it. It was so big, and it was just everything you could ask for. And even when I went an hour and a half without a bite in there, I was getting kind of discouraged. And I kept looking back at my co-owner, and I said, man, there has to be fish in here. There has to be fish. There is no way there's all this going on. It doesn't matter if it's an inch deep or 20 foot. If this is going on, there's going to be fish in there. And it turns out I was on the wrong side. I went over to the shallowest side where I trolled across because there were so many stumps. And when I got to the other side, my trolling motor started hitting the bottom about 20 foot from the reeds, and I thought, there is no way there are going to be fish in these reeds. And probably about 10 minutes after I started flipping the reeds, I caught a 4.5 pounder. And that fish was so shallow that when I flipped into the reeds, it was like a topwater bite, because even though I was flipping, it was like a topwater bite. That's how shallow those fish were, and it looked like a carp in the mud taking off. I mean, it was. I've never caught fish that shallow in my entire life. So whenever you have all those things come together and you're not getting bit, move around a little bit. Don't go out of the area, because there's going to be fish there. If you see all the bait, all their food, fish and people are so much alike. We're not going to be far away from food. And if there's stuff there we like, we're going to stay there. So, I mean, fish are exactly the same in the way they act. And, I mean, identical. I think that helps me a lot, and that's a big tip that you guys can take. If you just think about it like that, people think I'm silly because I tell that all the time. But you think about it, fish and people, when fish are spawning, that's all that's on their head. And when people are spawning, that's all that's on their head. And when they're wanting to eat, that's all. I mean, we're exactly the same. So if you just, think about it like that, it really makes sense about how they act. They're not as stupid as we think they are, and you got to give them credit because they're really smart animals. And that's the way it's helped me a lot is just picturing it like that, thinking about, where would I be, what would I be doing, and you kind of imagine yourself as a fish. I know it sounds kind of weird, but that's what you have to do, and they're not going to be far away from their food source. Let's see. We'll go back another slide. Managing small areas. That oxbow that I was fishing was so small. I mean, it was a bigger area, but the fishing, the place that the fish were at was so small. I had maybe half a mile of good reeds, and when you have two boats in there, we had two aluminum boats, so I had like a quarter mile, and we were both flip-flopping. So we'd go over it, and another guy'd go over it, and then I'd go over it again. You have to learn how to manage that spot, and I never stayed in that area. I never stayed in that area, longer than like 10:30, 11 o'clock each day after I figured out what was in there. Now, the first day when I was struggling and didn't even know this spot existed, I stayed in there probably till 11:30 or 12 just to fill out a limit. But when I caught that 4.5 pounder the first day, I knew the winning fish were in there, and my co-angler had a 4-pounder and lost two that were gigantic. So when I saw that, I had my 13.5 pounds or whatever I had, and I said, man, if I just go back, get all my stuff ready, and know what I'm going to do tomorrow, I can go in there, I can catch 20 pounds of fish if I just take a couple flipping rods and the right baits and just focus on that one stretch of reeds. So I left out of there early, went back to another spot that I had and only caught a couple, and ended up with, in 15th place going into the second day. I was happy with that, considering I had a really bad practice and considering that I didn't get to where I wanted to go and that I'd found a new area to fish. And that's another tip that you can, remember is when you're fishing in the tournament, and if you go out and practice and you had a really bad practice or you had a really good practice, tournament day is practice too. Don't always get stuck on what happened in practice, because I can tell you from experience, 90% of the time, whatever happened in practice for me doesn't happen in the tournament. I can go and catch 20 pounds the day before the tournament, go back the next day, and it's never the same. And there's a few situations where it will be, like if you're catching fish off beds or something like that, but it's never the same. So that's the biggest flaw I see people make, whether it's just at a local tournament level or even a professional level. People get so honed in on what they did during practice that they just forget about the tournament, and they're stubborn. I mean, I'm just as bad, and this is really the first or second year that I've kind of got away from that and not worried about practice, not worried about how bad my practice was, and I just went fishing. If you had a good practice and you're there the tournament day and the first hour and a half, 2 hours, it ain't working, go fishing. Go find them again, because you found them before, you'll find them again. And that's the way you have to think when you're practicing for a tournament and during the tournament. And that's what happened here. But when you manage those spots, if you have a small area, you have to remember, it's not as important on a one-day event. On a one-day event, I could have sitting there and I could have pounded those fish to death and not had to worry about it. But on a multi-day tournament, whether it be one or whether it be 2, 3, or 4 days, you have to remember that you're going to come back there at some point. It is, the final day, you just go all out and catch as many as you can. But whether it be the first, second, or third day, if you're fishing the 4-day tournament, you have to remember, I got to be back here. Do you want to catch all those fish and not catch anything the final day, or bet they're going to reload, or do you kind of catch what you think you need? And that's what I did. The second day when I went back, I had 19.4. And I had 18 pounds out of that spot, the reed spot in the backwater, by 9:30. My co-angler had 10 pounds, 3 fish for 10 pounds. So when that happens and it's, not even 10 o'clock yet, you probably need to go somewhere else, because you're going to be fishing the final day, and there's no need to hurt those fish anymore. And I caught probably 8 fish the second day and left it alone. And I said, if there's, and it turns out that I could have really pounded on that second day. But, looking back on it, I did the right thing by saving those fish. And you always have to remember that. Don't sit there and just catch every fish you can if you're fishing a multi-day tournament, because you have to come back at some point and you need those fish to be there. And that's what I did. And it turns out there was 19 pounds the second day. If I had stayed in there longer the first day, I might not have caught that much the second day, and I could have hurt myself. And I only won by 1 ounce. So every single fish that I caught counted. And that was, I think that was a big deal about my win. This is a picture of the Arkansas River the day. I think it was the second official practice day, it was Monday, the first official practice day that we had. And what was crazy is all that stuff you see out here in the middle is logs, the stuff that got jammed up in my tunnel. And it's chocolate milk. It's high. And so, when you show up to a place you've never been and it looks like this, you're kind of like, oh man, this is, I got excited. I know everybody else was bummed out and was freaking out because of the water conditions, but I was really excited about how it was going to play equal for everyone. And I had my little aluminum boat, and I didn't care to run over stuff out in the middle of the lake. And everybody else was concerned about hitting stuff. And I thought, well, I'll just go out there and jump it, and not have any problems. But, when the water gets that high and you've got that much current, all the eddies that are usually behind these trees and stuff are gone. So the places that they usually are might be one big spot. You might have where you have 10 eddies down this bank, you might have one great big one somewhere down here behind one of these barges or something like that. And that's where the fish are going to be, because they're not going to stay out there and swim in that stuff all day. They're going to be tucked away, waiting for stuff to come by, and they'll jump out and get it. They're not going to spend all that energy just swimming out in the middle of the river. They're going to go hide somewhere. They're going to get somewhere where there's no current. Okay, here's the tackle that I used. I'm not trying to sell any of this stuff or anything like that. This is just what I use. This is what I use all the time to flip, and I just want to help you guys out. Next time you go flipping or anything or fishing heavy cover, there's a few little tips that I can tell you that really help. The bait, I was flipping a Pit Boss, a Berkeley Havoc Pit Boss, and what's good about these baits is they're really soft. So what happens is whenever you have a fish, bite, you don't want a big, real hard plastic bait that you're going to have to penetrate with your hook. So it's easy to get penetration with the hook through those baits. And, I used a 4-aught Gamakatsu. It was an extra heavy cover, which is like you can catch an alligator on it. It's so big. And, they're so strong. And what was crazy about those fish that I was catching is it was so shallow that when you would hook one, they would pull so hard just trying to get away. And if you had anything less than that, they would have straightened it out. You could have caught a 2-pounder and it would have straightened your hook out. And those little black things there, those are pegs that you peg your sinker with. I was using a 1/4 ounce, which seems small, but that's a good tip too. Whenever you're flipping really shallow water, unless you're punching vegetation, like real thick cover, trying to get through canopies and matted grass, there's no need to have a big weight, because if your bait's only sinking 1 foot deep or 2 foot deep, why do you want a sinker that is bigger than, like 3/8 of an ounce or 1/2 ounce? Your bait's going to be in the silt. It's going to be going so fast by the fish. And there's certain situations where those fish want that bait going fast, but here they didn't. And in my, experience, when I'm fishing really shallow water, the lighter the weight, the better, because it doesn't get stuck down the silt. It doesn't go flying by the fish. It gives them time to eat it, gives them time to see it, and you're not stuck in the water where there's no fish. You're not, foot down in silt, and you're not down in the mud and all that good stuff. That lighter weight really helps you when you're flipping. Just make you more efficient and keeping your bait in the strike zone longer. And those pegs keep your bait or keep your sinker from sliding up the line, because when you're flipping reeds or flipping grass, your sinker could get hung up. And this keeps everything compact. It keeps everything real nice and neat, and keeps it where the bait and the sinker all together. and you know what's a bite when you get a bite and all that. And the reel, I used the 9-0-1 reel, and that's the reason I have it on here. I used the Revo Rocket, which is the quickest reel at the time. I guess it was the quickest reel at the time. It was the quickest reel I had. The 9-0-1 gear ratio, which people think is insane. But when you're flipping, especially really shallow water, that's what you need. You need to have something that is really quick, because those fish are going to come straight out at you, and you have to catch up to them. And if you give them an instant where that line's slack, they're going to throw. Because when you have a big hook, when you jerk on a fish, you're going to have a big hole in their mouth. So if they get any slack whatsoever, they're going to be gone. So you have to crank as fast as you can. And that was the same thing. I mean, I had to time them because they were running so fast to the boat that I could barely lift my rod up and they'd be in the boat. I mean, that's how quick they were going. I'd just flip every single one of them. That's how fast they were swimming. And I used a 7.6 Berkeley E-Motion flipping stick, which is just a real heavy flipping stick. You know, it's real stout. It's tough. And, you know, you wanted something that would bring those fish out of those reeds. And I actually used 20-pound fluorocarbon. I used 20-pound fluorocarbon on my reel. I could have got away with 25. I didn't want to use braid because it was so shy. It wasn't ultra thick vegetation, and I could get those fish out with fluorocarbon. And when you can get away with fluorocarbon, you're better off. I know people think that, braid, if they'll bite an Alabama reed, they'll bite braid. But in mine, I've seen how much difference using braid versus fluorocarbon in certain situations can make. And I know one of my co-anglers used braid one day, and I don't know how many more fish I caught with fluorocarbon versus him. And, I mean, there's no way we could flip in the same holes. There were so many reeds. So, if you can get away with fluorocarbon, they make 25-pound fluorocarbon. They make 20-pound fluorocarbon. Any of those are fine. 25-pound fluorocarbon is one of my favorite lines to flip with. But in this situation, I use 20 because of the pressure of the fish we're getting. Just from me and that other guy, I wanted to keep it, whatever he was using, I wanted to use something a little bit lighter maybe, or give the fish, a reason. I didn't want them to spook off or anything like that. Now, here's the keys to my win. The main keys that really helped me, and this will probably help you guys too. Yeah, you might want to write these down. I'm not a veteran or anything, but this is when I sat down and thought about what really helped me in my tournament. That I want. What did I do different in this one versus the other tournaments that I did bad in? This is what I thought of. And the main things, preparation, it's getting your stuff together at night or before the tournament, making sure all your tackle's together, making sure all your stuff's ready, whether it be your live well, make sure your live well works, make sure your lights work, make sure you have your scale, make sure you have your cone strips, your everything to keep your fish alive, extra tackle, everything, your prop. Just you have to make sure everything works exactly how it needs to work, and it's very time consuming. I very rarely get in bed before midnight during tournaments because it's not because I'm out doing stuff. It's because I'm wanting to make sure everything that I can do to be prepared is done. I want to make sure every single thing is perfect. Now, I'm really weird about that. I'll be out on the boat till midnight working on my stuff, just making sure that everything is done. And I spent a lot of extra time making sure my knots were right, making sure my hooks were sharp, making sure my line was okay. I mean, I changed line every single day, and I would throw hooks away. And it was, I never really done that before, but I think it made a big difference in this one. The elimination of water. When you're practicing for a tournament and during the tournament, you always have to rule out where there's not any fish. And that was what I did, and sometimes not finding fish in practice is a good thing because you end up having to find them in the tournament. And once you find them, you've kind of got one place and you just kind of expand on it. But you have to eliminate. You can't go down a stretch of 100 yards of bank and catch one fish and mark it on your graph and go back and say, I'm going to stop there, I'm going to stop there, I'm going to stop there. You have to eliminate water. You catch one 14-inch fish on a stretch of bank, unless you're really hurting, you probably shouldn't go back there. I mean, that's the thing. And unless it has really good potential or there's fish moving in, You have to just be smart and eliminate water. Utilizing your time on the water, like what I didn't do the first day when I was out jumping logs and getting stuck in the big trash piles and all that stuff and trying to go somewhere. I thought I need to stop, I need to fish because I'm going to waste my time. And when you have a set amount of time in a tournament, you have to make sure that you take every single minute and, use it to catch a fish. You can't catch a fish running around. You can't catch a fish tying knots. You can't catch a fish. You have to take time to do all that stuff, but you can't sit down and work on all your stuff during the tournament. You have to make sure everything's ready. And if your bait's not in the water, you're not going to catch a fish. You need to utilize your time and make sure that you're where the fish are at before you start fishing. Then you can kind of settle down and start fishing and figure things out. Dock talk is a big thing that really I wasn't too concerned with before this year. And all dock talk is all the anglers. You have all these people staying at the same motels, and you have everybody talking to each other. There's 10 or 15 people staying at each motel. You get meetings, everybody's talking to stuff. And I really avoided it at this tournament. And what was neat is when I was getting, I'd get back to the motel, we found a motel across the street that there was nobody. There was 2 other boats there, and everybody went in and worked on their stuff, didn't say anything to each other, wished each other good luck. It was different from any other place I've been. Usually there's 20 people hanging out your boat telling you all this, telling you all that, telling you what you need to do. And you can tell yourself you're not thinking about it, but when you get out there, you start thinking about it. And when you avoid that stuff, you fall back and you just trust yourself and not listen to anybody else. I have a few good friends that I can trust, but most of the time people are going to tell you stuff that's not true, believe it or not. And it only hurts you. And I figured that out, and I didn't talk to anybody during this tournament. I didn't listen to any. I went out and fished, did what I thought I needed to do to win, and I ended up winning. Utilizing your equipment, that's making sure you have, your electronics, your navionics charts, your power poles, your trolling motor, everything, making sure everything that you use it. You have it for a reason. Make sure you use it. Setting realistic goals, making sure that you have realistic goals. Don't say, I'm going to go catch 25 pounds a day. Know your limitations. Know if you can only catch 12 pounds a day to get a check, go try to catch 12 pounds. If you catch more than that, you're doing good. Set realistic goals. Don't really – swinging for the fences is kind of a iffy subject because, you're really not giving yourself a chance. If you just go and fish and set realistic goals, do your best. There's tournaments that you go and all you're going to do is make a check. You just have to keep in your mind, your goals and what you plan to accomplish. And sometimes it's a lot better. You're keeping it simple. I had 3 rods in the boat the final day. Had 3 flipping sticks. Had I don't know how many pit bosses, and I had a few other flipping baits, and all I had was sinkers and hooks and pegs. And I kept it simple. Don't go where you caught them flipping the day before. Don't go take a buzz bait and a jig and whatever and a crankbait and try to make something happen when you caught them flipping. Go flip. That's you have to keep things simple. Knowing your strengths, know what you're good at. Don't go and try to do something crazy, which I've done. I was the world's worst for that. The past couple of years, I'd go out and try to drop shot 150 foot of water or whatever. When all I ever did back here at the house was flip in the rivers and fish docks and bedfish. That was the only things I really knew how to do. I know how to fish deep a little bit, but don't try to make things happen. Go fish to your strengths. There's always going to be fish you can catch that you know how to catch. There's going to be places that you can go and your strengths are going to work better than others, but there's always going to be fish you can catch if you just fish your strengths. Paying attention to your co-angler, your pro, always make sure you pay attention to them because if there's 2 people in your boat, it's like a puzzle figuring fish out. If you just pay attention to them, don't just blow them off like they don't know what they're doing. Always pay attention because they're going to get clues too from those fish. So if you see, not necessarily seeing what your co-angler caught one on or your pro caught one on, but they're going to tell you stuff. Those fish are always giving you clues. And if you don't pay attention to your co or your pro angler, then it's not going to you're putting yourself in a disadvantage. You always have to pay attention to them and just relaxing. I was bad for that, getting all tensed up and stuff. This past tournament that I won, I wasn't nervous till the final, maybe the final hour of the tournament. I was as relaxed as I've ever been, and it helps you fish a lot better. If you ever notice how many more fish you catch in practice versus the tournament, because when you get there in the tournament, you get all stressed out and you get all torqued up and you all tensed up. You don't fish how you fish during practice because you're relaxed in practice and you're not during the tournament. So always go out there and just relax. Just picture it like you're fishing with one of your buddies, and you'll do a lot better. Trust in your instincts. Always trust your gut. If something says go fish there, go fish over there. Because I can tell you with 100% certainty, if you go by something and you say there's probably a fish on there, then there probably is a fish on there. I mean, there'll be times where there's not. You go by a tree that's in the water and you say, dang, that looks good. And you probably need to go fish it because there's probably a fish there. And then understanding the fish, you have to always make sure. It's like I said, fishing people are so much alike. It sounds really silly, but just try to understand what they're thinking. They're going to be free from food at all. So if you can find food, you're going to find a fish. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, that's the last slide, John, if you want to. Hope I didn't bore you guys to death. John, are you there?
I'm here. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, and we do have some questions. Give me 1 second. You can hear me okay?
I thought you were hanging me out to dry there.
No. I pushed start video 3 times. It just wouldn't click on. I wouldn't do that, brother. All right, so guys, if there's any more questions, you can type them in now if you have any. I do have a bunch on here that I want to go through. We'll try to limit this for the next 20 minutes. We'll try to end it up at the top of the hour. The first question was, and again, these came throughout the whole thing, so some of them are repetitive of what you've already talked about, Skylar, but
okay.
Make sure they all get asked. This is how do you catch fish when fish are hard and you can't find them?
When fishing's hard and you can't find them?
Yep.
That goes back to relying on your strengths and just whenever it's really hard and really tough, just like it was the Arkansas River, you always have to just dig deep and just trust your gut and just go fishing. If you just act like it's any other day, if it's hard for you, it's going to be hard for everybody else. If you're just having a good day or a fun day of fishing, then it can be pretty rough if the fish aren't biting that good. But if it's during a tournament and the fishing's hard, just always stick to your strengths and just remember, if it's hard for you, it's hard for everybody else.
All right. Nicholas asks, what types of structure do you like fit? What type of structures do fish like? Sorry.
Fish, and that goes back to, y'all probably get tired of me saying this, but everything, fish and people, we want to have a house around us. We like having, a roof over our heads, and fish are the same way, whether it be docks or a brush pile or that beaver dam that was in my picture or reeds. They're not going to be far away. There's situations where they'll follow bait out in the main lake and all that stuff trying to eat. But for the most part, they always like to have something around them. And, docks are one of my favorite places to fish because they have that big canopy over their head. They have all that shade. They have bluegills to eat. Brush piles are the same way. It's shade. It's a shade thing because fish don't have eyelids. They can't close their eyes. So they don't want to be out in the sun all the time because they can't. I guess it would hurt. I would imagine it would hurt. And, so they want to be under shade or they want to be around something, hard cover, whether it be rocks or anything that can create shade.
All right. Michael asks, what bait do you use mostly?
It's probably a jig, probably just an old pig and jig or a jig with a soft plastic trailer. That's what I grew up fishing around docks, and I like to flip too. But that jig, if I'm in a bind and I need to catch some fish, I always tie that jig on, and it can be brown, it can be black and blue, it can be bluegill colored, just depending on the situation. But that jig's probably my favorite bait.
All right. And then Brian asked, what jig did you use?
The jigs I use, at the Arkansas River, I flipped that Pit Boss, which it's not a jig, but it's similar in ways. The jigs that I use, Buckeye Lures makes them. It's their flipping jig. Jason Williamson made them. He designed them for Buckeye, and they've got a real sharp hook and they've got a real thick hook in them, and they're just really good to flip. And I get a buddy of mine to make me some jigs that I can skip really well. It has a flat head on them. They skip a mile. It's just like a rock. When you skip a rock, you want to have a flatter head and something that's going to skip really well. I always I want thicker weed guards because I'm usually flipping a jig in the harder cover and real stuff that'll get tangled up. And but any jig will work as long as you have confidence in it, really.
All right, Pete, how did you find that place where you were fishing?
Yeah, that place that I fished, really, when I hit all those logs, I kind of looked on my graph, and I have my chart in there, and I could see that backwater area. And I didn't want to just fish the main river. For one, you couldn't fish it because of the current. And two, I didn't think there was many fish out there. And when I hit all those logs and realized I was running out of time, that I needed to fish, and I just saw that backwater area and thought, that's a good place for me to get out of the current. That's going to be hard for everybody else to get in. I'm just going to go in there, and it turns out that was the winning spot. And that's usually the way it happens in the tournaments that you win.
All right. Jim asked, how far back did you flip in is it Toolies?
Yeah, it was the reeds or Toolies. Yeah,
okay. Never heard that term, but okay.
Yeah, they're either way. The green stuff growing out of the ground.
Yeah, I got it.
No, I caught a couple fish way back, maybe 10 foot back in it, but they were smaller fish. The bigger fish that I caught were 2 to 3 foot back in the grass. I caught a few on the edge of it, but most of them were 2 to 3 foot inside. There's little cuts, and if you look, there's probably no pictures that you can see it, but if you look at a stretch of reeds, you'll have different ones. You'll have ones that are kind of scattered out. You'll have a patch here, a patch there, but the reeds I was fishing had a real hard edge on them, which gives those fish a real hard edge to be on. And there's little nooks and crannies. There's little, 2 foot indentions in the reeds that you can flip in. And that's where I was catching most of it. It wasn't really flipping 2 foot back into the reeds. It was flipping in those little nooks and crannies that were 2 foot back in, 2 foot cuts back into the reeds.
Gotcha. Nicholas asked, what happens if you know the fish are there and you can see them biting, but nothing you have tried works?
You probably, if you can see the fish and they're biting, one thing you need to do is probably throw lighter line and probably throw smaller baits. Sometimes there's situations where those fish will get so honed in on what they're eating that they're almost impossible to catch. And I've seen it thousands of times where you go into the back of a pocket and there's fish breaking everywhere and you can't catch a single one. And just because they're eating doesn't mean they're always going to bite. Because they're smart. I mean, some of them are stupid. I'll give you that. I caught a few stupid fish in that tournament. If it wasn't for stupid fish, I probably wouldn't have won. But if you see this fish, throw lighter line, throw spinning gear, throw 6 to 8 pound test line, throw smaller lures, smaller Cinco, smaller worm type baits. Something natural, something that those fish find out what those fish are eating and try to match exactly what it is, and you'll probably have a higher percentage to catch them.
All right. Michael asks, well, what part of the Arkansas River did you fish out of Three Forks and sent to Kerr Flats?
It was Three Forks Harbors where we took off. The Weber Falls Reservoir is where is the area we fished. Now you could lock through. I don't know where you could go. You go anywhere. There was no limits on the water, but we took out of Three Forks Harbor, and I fished about 20 miles down towards the lock, towards the bottom lock. But there was I don't know how many locks you'd go through. I knew a buddy of mine went through 2 or 3, and there was really no limitations. It was a gigantic area to fish, but that's that. We put in Muskogee. It was based out of Muskogee, really.
Okay. All right. Carl asks, what are your thoughts on how to fish river tides and what's the best tide?
I grew up, and that's a good question. I grew up fishing the youth stuff, like the youth TBF, and I was, 13, 14 years old, and I lived in Virginia at the time. So people, surprisingly, I have a lot of, experience with tide fishing, even though I'm just a redneck from Tennessee. And but we would go to the Chickahominy River and, the James River, and those places. It was really crazy because when I'd first get there, then the tide would be high. I would look at everything and say, "Man, there's going to be fish in all this stuff. It's so good. It looks crazy." And then the tide would fall out. I wouldn't catch anything. Then the tide would fall out, and I'd be going in, and people would be going out. And then I realized that my favorite tide's a low tide because it limits the areas where the fish can go. When the tide's falling, it's the best because all the food's coming out, all the cover, all the grass, all the trees, everything. The food's coming out to the fish, and they're feeding really well. When the tide's going up and it's moving back in that stuff, the fish can be hard to catch. But extreme low tide, dead low tide, and when it's falling is my favorite time to fish tidal rivers, and I've done really well fishing that pattern. Making sure I go to places where I know there's food coming to them. And kind of funnels, and they get funneled in, and just waiting on the fish to move up and start eating.
All right. This is from Jeff. What's normally your favorite river bait?
My favorite river bait is normally probably that pit boss. It's probably a second would be a spinner bait or a buzz bait too, because you can cover so much water. Now, if you have crystal clear water conditions, it can differ. But my favorite bait to go and flip in a river to figure out where the fish are is that pit boss. I've caught so many fish on that thing. It's crazy because it mimics a bluegill, it mimics a crawfish, anything. They've got shad colors. You can catch just about anything on that bait, and I've done really well fishing rivers back here at the house. That's what I throw most of the time.
This is from one of my northern friends. He asks, "Have you ever caught walleye shallow? They really pull hard."
Hey, what's funny is I went below the Douglas Dam the other day on a guide trip with two guys, and they were from Louisiana, and they said, "Take me catch some smallmouth." And I said, "Okay." So I took them down there, and we went and flipped, and we probably caught a dozen walleye flipping trees on that pit boss. They were in 2 foot of water or less. They do pull hard. We thought they were smallmouth.
I didn't throw that one. Nicholas, for finesse is a Carolina rig, drop shot, or shaky head fishing good for those fish when they don't want to bite. And which is the best one to tie on if it's tough?
Definitely the shaky head and the drop shot. The Carolina rig's really good too. It's the smaller Carolina rig. It's called the Mojo rig, or I call it the Mojo rig. It's basically just a small Carolina rig that you throw on a spinning rod. But the drop shot and the shaky head are my two favorites. If you put a shaky head with a 4-inch worm with an 1/8 ounce head, don't use too big a head. Make sure it falls really slow. And 6 to 8 pound test in a spinning gear, and you throw it, and you're going to catch a lot of fish. They might not be big, but you're going to catch a lot of fish. The drop shot's really good too. If you know the fish are up off the bottom, or if you want to give them something different, if everybody throws a shaky head, throw a drop shot. I've caught probably the equal amount of fish on both. And the Carolina rig's good too if you downsize everything and just throw lighter line. And but the shaky head's by far the best, I would say.
All right. Brent asks, you used mono. Do you prefer this over braided and jigging, or were you saying you use this as leader?
No, I use fluorocarbon, and the braid, I use it for a lot of stuff. And there's times I'll tie leaders on, like if I'm throwing spinning gear, like I was saying, throw 8 pound test, I'll throw 10 pound braid with an 8 pound fluorocarbon leader, and I'll tie a lead. But when I was flipping those reeds, I used 25 pound fluorocarbon, just straight fluorocarbon, and 20 pound fluorocarbon, just straight fluorocarbon. And there's times when you throw braid with leaders, I only do it on spinning gear. There's some pros that throw braid and tie a 25 pound leader. I don't want anything to give. I want everything to be, I don't want there to be any chance of a line breaking. I don't have that much confidence in my knot time. And, but, there's all my top waters I throw on braid. There's only a couple I throw prop baits, like a devil's horse on mono, just because I don't want the blades to get tangled up in the prop. But I'll throw everything else on braid, whether it be a spook or a frog or a buzz bait. I just like the no stretch for that, but I flip 90% of the time with fluorocarbon.
All right, we've got about 3 or 4 more questions here to go, and then we're going to end it up at the top of the hour if we get there.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite way to fish bass?
Hey,
from Luke.
Yeah, probably fishing shallow, and I've hurt myself so much in the past by trying to do all kinds of other crazy stuff, fishing 30 foot deep, but fishing shallow is by far my favorite way to catch bass. Is flipping, going around the bank, looking at targets, and seeing what you're throwing at, and knowing there's probably going to be a fish there, and not just throwing it in the middle of nowhere. I like fishing shallow. That's my favorite way to catch them.
All right. Nicholas asks again, why does lighter line matter when bass fishing?
Lighter line matters, and people don't realize how it's not necessarily that they're seeing your line, but they can feel it. I mean, there's times they can see in crystal clear water, they can get line shots. Just they have all those sensors on their body. The lateral line for one thing, but they can feel that line. The thicker the line you have, the more chance they're going to feel that line or they're going to see it. And there's always been controversy about fish being able to see line and not being able to see line and all that good stuff. But when you're fishing for a fish that's eating and not reacting to your bait, the lighter the line, the better. Now, when you're catching a fish that's just biting your lure just to bite it because it's just a reaction, then it doesn't matter that much. But if you're catching a fish that is feeding, that is looking at your bait and saying, I want to eat that thing, the lighter line, the better, because they're not going to feel it and they're not going to see it. It just makes a big difference.
All right. From Jim, do you use a snell knot or other knot when flipping?
When I use braid to flip when I'm punching, that's the 10% of the time that I don't use fluorocarbon. I'll use a snell knot. And when I'm punching, punching through vegetation with like an ounce or ounce and a half, 2 ounce weight, you want to have that braid because you're fishing the biggest mess piles you've ever seen. So it's not really going to matter about your line then. But I use a snell knot then because the bigger the weight, if you can imagine those fish's mouth, when their mouth's closed, they have all that weight and that bait in their mouth. And when you jerk, that sinker is going to bust their mouth open. So if you don't have a snell knot, that snell knot's like a trap. When that sinker hits that hook, it pops it out, and it makes it where it'll hook the fish in the top of the mouth almost 90% of the time. I mean, you get a lot more fish in the boat. But I just use it when I'm flipping fluorocarbon. I use a couple other ones. I don't know the names of them. It's like the San Diego Gem, not some crazy stuff when I'm flipping fluorocarbon. But braid, I always use a snell knot when I'm flipping, and that's a good question. But I just use – there's a couple other ones that you can look up, and it changes every year. Every year I get a different knot. One's not better than the other. I just like to experiment with them and see if one's stronger than the other, but I haven't had any problems with any of them.
All right, last question is from Bubba. It says, if bass are like people when spawning, if I dump a beer in the water, will a small buck bass lead me to bigger females?
Well, it could happen. I've never tried that before.
It's called alcohol abuse.
I might give that a that's hilarious. No, what's crazy though is, when I say fish are like people, when the fish is on the bed and I mean, those fish, that's their area to guard. Yep. And when something busts in their bed, they're all over it. I mean, it's like somebody breaking down the door right here. I'm gonna, I ain't just gonna be like, hey, I'm gonna get pretty mad. And you just think about it. There's a lot of similarities in fish and people.
All right, well, Skylar, that's it. All the questions that we can do for tonight, guys. If we didn't get to you, sorry about that. And Jim said, thank you, Skylar. One of the guys on tonight. I'm sure everybody did appreciate you being on here.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
And I want to thank Bass Pro again for sponsoring and helping with this. Guys, like I said, this will be on the on our website. It's for Skylar have it on his Facebook page, on his. He's also a guide, which I did forget to mention, on Douglas Lake in Tennessee. So if you want to go out with a good guide, he's your guy.
I promise I won't talk about spawning fish and all that.
All right, brother. Well, guys, I appreciate it. Everybody have a great evening. Thanks again for showing up. And Skylar, I'll give you a jingle tomorrow just to catch up. And
Absolutely.
Bass Pro, Navionics, and especially your win. Congratulations on heading to the 2017 Classic.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
Cool stuff, brother. Take care. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks.
See you guys.